What's going on, everyone? We are back. Today we're talking about Volo, Guide to Monsters. Let's take a quick look at him. He is a 4-mana 3/2 human wizard. Here's his effect. Whenever you cast a creature spell that doesn't share a creature type with a creature you control or a creature in your graveyard, copy that spell. So whenever you play something on the field, or whenever you're attempting to cast a creature, so long as you've cast no other creatures of that type, right, or subtype, or if it's no long, or so long as you don't share a type with something in the graveyard, it works and you're able to cast it. So, for example, you won't be able to cast. Let me give you guys a quick example. Let's see. Spoilers, but here's an undercover operative. If you can look at the card on its creature type, it's a shapeshifter rogue. So what does that mean? When it enters the battlefield, Volo will check for any shapeshifters. If there are none, he's copied. But let's say you do have a shapeshifter on the field. Then when you cast this, Volo will check and say, no, I've already seen a shapeshifter, but I've never seen a rogue before, and he'll copy that spell, giving you 2 ETBs and 2 creatures entering the battlefield, because a copy of a creature spell is a token. So Volo is all about getting as many different types of tribes into one deck as possible. That's right, this is anti-tribal tribal, right, if that makes sense. So we're going to be filling it. There are going to be very little cards that share types, and if they do, it's mostly because their effects are really good. The idea is that we're trying to get as many ETBs. We're getting cards that are normally, hey, that's pretty good. But when you have 2 of them on the field, that's really good. That's what Volo's all about. So let's get into it and talk about Volo, the Guide to Monsters. Kicking it off, we have one Planeswalker, Vivian, Champion of the Wilds. She's got a couple of effects, but her most important one, in my opinion, you may cast creature spells as though they have flash. Really nice. She has a +1 that says until your next turn, one target creature gains vigilance and reach. Pretty useful. The -3 allows us to look at the top 3 cards of our library, exile 1 face down, and put the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. For as long as the card remains exiled, you may cast it if it's a creature card. We're mostly keeping her just for her passive flash effect on our creatures, and her +1 allows us to make our creatures have vigilance and reach, which is something that we're kind of lacking. Reach, being said. Going into the creature. There are a lot of creatures in this deck. All of them pretty good, but all of them getting, or most of them getting copied by Volo allows for a lot of different interesting potentials. For example, a Sakura Tribe Elder. You can sacrifice it to search for a basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped. But with 2 of them, we can now do it 2 times. Ornithopter gives us mana. Prosperous Innkeeper. When it ETBs, it creates a treasure token. We're going to be making 2 of them when we have Volo on board. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. So now, when we have 2 Prosperous Innkeepers, we're making 2 life per every creature entering the battlefield. This counts those tokens that we're going to be making in the future, right? So if we have 2 Prosperous Innkeepers, and then we play a Sakura Tribe Elder, it's going to come in, it's going to gain us 2 life from the 2 Prosperous Innkeepers, right? And then he's going to become a copy, right? Thanks to Volo. And then that copy also grants us life, because it is another creature entering the battlefield. So this Prosperous Innkeeper, ridiculous in Volo. We have a plant creature type. I'm just going to call them by their types. A plant creature type that can be tapped to give us 1 mana of any color. And if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we get 2 mana instead. This is really good, especially since we get to the later end and a lot of our creatures are strong. A Merfolk here that can be tapped to untap another target permanent, so allowing us to untap lands or untap creatures who have swung in. We have a secondary Volo in the deck. Now, this Volo will not be copied, right? Because him being a human wizard, Volo will see himself entering the battlefield and kind of get disgusted, and he won't copy the other Volo, which kind of sucks. But when this Volo enters the battlefield, it gives us a very special artifact called Volo's Journal. It has hexproof, and whenever you cast a creature spell, you have to note one of its creature types that haven't been noted for that artifact. So essentially, as this is on the field, you're building up a repertoire of like a book of a bunch of different style creatures. His other effect is you can tap him to draw a card for each creature type noted by the journal. So with all the different creature types that we have, if we have these two Volos on the board and we tap him down, we might just draw out almost half our deck using this little two-piece right here. I put him in just because I like Volo, so I wanted to add him to the idea. Loyal Drake. At the beginning of your of combat on your turn, if you control your commander, draw a card. If we have two of them, we're drawing two. Spring Bloom Druid allows some ramp. We sacrifice it, sacrifice a land and get two more from it when it ETBs. So when we get two of them, obviously, I'm gonna stop saying when we get two of them. You guys get the idea now. A familiar that says when it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life, and if it were to die, draw a card. We have to stop for a second. Sea Dasher Octopus will be our first octopus, and Mutate. Mutate works weird with Volo. So if you mutate onto something, you'll create a copy, because obviously there's only one octopus, and Volo like makes a copy of it. And the copy will also be mutating onto something. So for example, I have a handy creature token right here. Let's say we have this fox and we go to mutate. Its first effect triggers, and then its second effect triggers. So we'll have 2 mutated cards on top of this one creature. All right, so it'll be this will be important later when we get to some of the more complex affected mutate creatures. But right now it's pretty simple and straightforward. Mana Gorger Hydra. Whenever a player casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. It has trample. Spike Weaver. Now I like this guy. He's a spike. There's not a lot of spike creature types, so it allows me to like it. This entire deck allows you to use creature types that you would never normally use. It allows you to look at cards a different way. It enters with 3 +1/+1 counters. The main thing we're gonna use it for is that for one generic, we can remove one of those +1/+1 counters to prevent all combat damage that would happen to you this turn. So this guy is just for 3 turns, you're not getting hit with combat damage so long as he's on the field. Obviously, if you have 2 of them, that's 6 turns. Anyway, Clever Impersonator. This is a shapeshifter. When it enters the battlefield, copy target non-land permanent on the battlefield. Sabertooth. This is amazing. Obviously, we have the other side. I'll just skip ahead to this guy real quick. There we go. We have the Drake Sabertooth combo, right? The Drake enters the battlefield, untap 5 lands, and then using those 5 lands that you've untapped, you can spend 2 of it to bounce the Drake back to your hand, and then like just keep doing this over and over and over again. And the reason we're able to do this over and over and over again is because if Volo's on board, we're making 2 Drakes on that first cast, which means we're untapping 10 lands instead of 5. Okay? So you guys get the idea of that. Tamir Sabertooth is great. Let's move on. Continuing on, we have another undercover, or we have not another, but we have undercover operative. Now we already have a shapeshifter in the deck, but we don't have a lot of rogues, so Volo will copy this rogue creature type. When it enters the battlefield, it enters as a copy of target creature on the battlefield, except it has a shield counter on it. Okay? Solemn Simulacrum is our golem. A Salamander Pirate. When it enters the battlefield, Exile target non-salamander on the battlefield, and that creature's controller creates a 4/3 salamander. We can also encore it from our graveyard. Migratory Greathorn. This is a beast. We have a lot of beasts in this deck. Unfortunately, I'm trying to cut down on it, and this guy actually might be one of the first ones to go. Anyway, when it enters the battlefield or when this creature mutates, it allows you to ramp for 1 land card and putting it on the battlefield. A Gem Raiser. It's got to mutate, and whenever this creature mutates, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. Mirror Hall Mimic. You may have it enter as a battlefield of any creature on the battlefield except it's a spirit in addition to the other types. You can disturb it for 5 to get Ghastly Mimicry. There you go, Ghastly Mimicry. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a copy of enchanted creature, except it's a spirit in addition to its other types. And obviously, if this would be put into the graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. So even its discarded side, its disturbed side, very useful for increasing the number of creatures we have on the side of our field. Merc Fiend Liege. Things like this is why it's amazing to create copies with Volo. It's a horror. It's our horror from the deck. When another green creature, all other green creatures get +1/+1. All other blue creatures get +1/+1. So if you have a card that's green and blue, it's getting +2/+2. The last effect is my favorite though. You can untap all of your green and blue creatures during each other player's untap step. So if you have something that can be tapped for mana, it untaps on your opponent's untap steps. Very useful. Acidic Slime is our ooze for the deck. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or land your opponent has. For our Chimera slot, we have the Perplexing Chimera. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may exchange control of Perplexing Chimera and that spell. If you do, choose new targets for that spell. It's like a counterspell if the counterspell kind of took control of that spell for yourself. So we use this just to steal something that our opponent's about to play. Maybe he's about to play a targeted removal, and this is just your Uno reverse card. Play it, I take that, and I'm going to have you target something else, right? For our Avatar slot, we have the Wandering Archaic. Whenever an opponent casts an instant sorcery spell, they have to pay 2 extra generic. If they don't, you may copy that spell and choose new targets for the copy. Similar to Perplexing Chimera, except now we're just also stealing their stuff. Explore the Vast Lands is the sorcery side of this card that we don't really use. I don't want to talk too much about it because most times we're running it on this side. We have another Elk Beast, so it's an elk, very important, different than just a generic beast. When it mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile X permanent cards, where X is the number of times this creature mutated. Put those cards on the battlefield. Put those permanent cards on the battlefield. Very, very useful. Because we're going to have maybe, if it comes in with a copy, because Volo will make a copy of it, we'll have 1, 2, 3 triggers of this. Now, I can explain why it would be 3 and not just 2, but like, just trust me in explaining that we'll have 3 copies of this effect if Volo is on the board and we mutate successfully. Okay? For our Hippo Dinosaur slot, we have Karuga. Very useful for filling our hand. There have been times when I've been just slinging all my creatures, but I've run out of cards in hand. This guy has saved my life. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card for each other permanent you control with converted mana cost 3 or greater. With Volo on board, he will make a copy, but because he's a legend, the copy will die as soon as it hits the board. But its effect will still go off. So you're going to be drawing cards because a lot of your creatures have power, have a converted mana cost 3 or greater. Spore Mound is our fungus. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, create a sapling. Just a passive thing to get bigger. The monkey himself, King Kong Kogla. Kogla. There you go. It's a 7/6 ape. This guy is awesome. Unfortunately, he'll also be sacrificed if Volo is on the field. But its effect happens. When it enters the battlefield, it fights up to one target creature you don't control. It has to. When it attacks, destroy an artifact or enchantment defending player controls. This is why we have him mainly in the deck, for his activated ability. Return a human you control to its owner's hand, and he gets indestructible until the end of turn. Volo is a human. Volo is subject to a lot of hate from your opponents. Having ways to protect Volo is imperative, because if Volo can't see these new creatures entering the battlefield, he can't make copies of them. So we gotta have maximum number of ways to protect Volo. Rampaging Baloths. Trample with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield, you make another 4/4 green beast creature token. That's a beast slot, so you gotta be careful of that one though. For our artifact dragon slot, Steel Hellkite. For X, you can destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X, whose controller was dealt combat damage this turn. Activate this ability only once each turn. So you can tap X after hitting an opponent with the Steel Hellkite to destroy all non-land permanents on your opponent's side of the field, depending on how you pay the mana for it. Okay? Very useful. Diluvian Primordial. This guy's really good. He's your avatar slot. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you can copy an instant or sorcery spell from that player's graveyard and cast it. Cast it that turn without paying its mana cost. Very useful for just stealing stuff from your opponent's grave. We have another dinosaur avatar, right? This guy is a dinosaur avatar. I said that already. He's a 5/5. When he or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. Very good. Hornet Queen is our insect. When it enters the battlefield, you create 4 green insect creature tokens with flying and death touch. Amazing. You want to know what's even better? Having 8 green insect creature tokens with flying and death touch. That's right, Volo copying her ETB, or making a copy of this creature, and the creature's ETB triggering again, allows us to make a lot of stuff. For our serpent slot, we have Junkwinder. It's got affinity for tokens, so all of these token creatures that we've been making can be tapped to help pay for him. And he has an effect that says whenever a token enters the battlefield under your control, you can tap a non-land permanent an opponent controls, and it doesn't untap during its opponent's next end step, or its next untap step. Very good for locking your opponent down and making them feel powerless. Beanstalk Giant is our giant for the deck. You can obviously use his sorcery to ramp, but him just being on the battlefield has power equal to the number of lands on the field. This is our targeted removal in the deck, Terastodon. It's our elephant. When it enters the battlefield, you can destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. So you can target lands, you can target artifacts, or enchantments. You can't target other people's creatures. But for every permanent destroyed this way, that player creates a 3/3 green elephant. Okay, so good for removing your opponent's back row things that bother you. In place of the elder, okay, so I don't have the money for this card. Hold on, give me a sec. So we don't have a Crater Hoof Behemoth in this deck, mostly because we have too many beasts already. And Crater Hoof, as great as he would be as a game ender, kind of falls short. I want to maximize Volo's copy triggers. Enter the Eldrazi Boar. When you cast him, creatures you control get +2/+2 and gain trample in the end of turn. It has trample and haste itself. So when it enters the battlefield, it grants all our stuff +2/+2 and trample. Okay, very useful, very nice game ender finisher there. The last card we got in our creatures is a worm, a 7 mana, a 16/16 with convoke, meaning all of the creatures, token or not, can help cast this spell by tapping themselves for 1 generic, and it's an indestructible 16/16, a huge game ender for your opponent to deal with. That's all the creatures in this deck. Let's talk about enchantments. We have an extremely small enchantment engine. Talking about Broken Fall and Molting Skin, 2 cards that do essentially the same thing. We can bounce these enchantments to our hand to ensure that our creature, a target creature, gets to regenerate, doesn't get destroyed. We use this on Volo all the time. We must protect Volo at all costs. Alright? The next enchantment, Garruk's Uprising, extremely useful when it enters the battlefield. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Yeah, of course. All of our creatures gain trample, useful. And whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield, draw a card. So this guy will be helping with our hand. And then the last enchantment, Path of Discovery. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. Reveal the top card of your library. Put that card into your hand if it's a land. Otherwise, put a +1/+1 counter on the creature and put that card back on top of your library or in the graveyard if you don't need it. Very useful card to help fix the top of our deck, allowing the lands to be removed as quickly and efficiently as possible and allowing our creatures to be the next thing coming. So, excellent enchantment. Let's move on to artifacts. Soul Ring for the ramps. Giant's Amulet for protection. Swifties, protection. Arcane Signet, ramps. Mask of Avacyn, protection. Life Crafter's Bestiary. At the beginning of your upkeep, scry 1. Ensure, you can look at the top and make sure it's exactly what you need. But whenever you cast a creature spell, you may pay green. If you do, draw a card. Reality Shift. Oh. That's it for all the artifacts. There weren't that many. Finishing off with our instants and sorceries. Reality Shift is going to be our targeted removal, forcing the player to exile a creature and then just take the top card of their library and put it face down, right? So very useful. Rampant Growth for the ramping. Unnatural Connection for the ramping. Cultivate, Kadama's Reach, ramping, right? Terramorph for the ramps. Okay, so I just wanted to get those out of the way now. Running Beast Within for another removal, destroy target permanent. Talking about the other ones though, now we get to some of the really cool ones. Return to the Wild Speaker. Draw a card equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. We have a lot of big creatures, so playing this allows us to draw a card for the power of one of them. The other effect that makes all non-human creatures you control +3/+3. Aside from Volos, we're not running any humans in this deck, so buffing our entire board, creature tokens and all, with +3/+3 could be a game ender. Shamanistic Revelation allows us to draw a card for each creature you control. And we gain 4 life for each creature you control with power 4 or greater. Very, very useful. The Expertise allows us to return up to 3 target artifacts and or creatures to their owner's hand. So bounce 3 things and cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less for free. Very useful to return cards to our hand. We can even target our tokens if we want to get rid of, say, a creature and its token counterpart at the same time, just to play that one creature again. This card is our bread and butter for that. Curse of the Swine is another board wipe here, just about our only real board wipe in the deck. For X blue, you exile X target creatures. For each creature exiled this way, create a 2/2 green board creature token. okay, for your opponent or whoever you're exiling. Here are the last two cards. Perplexing Test. This is our one of our best cards in the deck. 5 mana, choose one. Either return all creature tokens to their owner's hand, or return all non-token creatures to their owner's hand. Right? If your opponent has a big board of 1,000,000 zombie creature tokens, and you have a board filled with non-creature tokens, because that's really what you're casting, you can play this to kind of flip the whole game on its head. Or if it's vice versa, let's say you have only your creature tokens on the field, and your opponent has big blockers, non-creatures of course, you can play this to bounce. Amazing card. This one is my last card. It's one of my favorites. Echoing Equation. Talking about the backside, it's a Troll Druid. As long as you control 8 or more lands, it gets +5/+5. So kind of useful, but we try to avoid using the side. This guy combos amazingly. 5 mana Echoing Equation. Choose target creature you control, and each other creature you control becomes a copy of it until the end of turn. Except if it's a legendary, it is no longer legendary. So, my favorite thing to do, and I've done this to win the game. I have a pretty decent sized board, let's say 10 creatures or so, and I have Volo on the board. I cast Echoing Equation, turning all creatures on the board into Volo. They won't be destroyed because they're considered non-legendaries. And then I cast just one guy, right? One fox. And since Volo, every single Volo on the board will create a copy of that fox for each instance of a Volo on the board, right? It's a mind-blowing thing. Just imagine having the Volo triggers happen because of that one fox entering the battlefield. It's amazing. Love this card. That's the last spell in the deck. Let's talk about the land. Moving on into the lands. You have your Command Tower, of course, Exotic Orchard, Blighted Woodlands, Evolving Isles. Right? Just nice mana fixing. Layer of the Hydra, allowing us to turn this card into a Hydra at any point in the future. Just nice to have. A Mirror Lake card, allowing us to create a token that's a copy of a creature I control, except it enters with additional +1/+1 counter. Right? Just useful if there's like, dang, I really want to swing in for game, but I'm just a little bit of damage short. This thing could be the surprise that your opponent wasn't expecting. We have our dual lands, the Simic Guildgate, Tidepool Bridge, Quandrix Campus, the Coast, Thornfall, Vine Glimmer Snarl, and Woodland Stream. Then finishing off with the basics. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 forests. That's a lot of forest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 islands. A fair amount of islands. Those are all the lands in the deck. Let's finish off with closing thoughts. So, what can be said about Volo, the Guide to Monsters? This deck is extremely powerful. Almost deceptively so. You're ramping a lot faster than you would think because a lot of your creatures are coming in as copies that can help you ramp, right? You're able to do weird combos with the mutate and things like that. My favorite part about this deck, aside from it just being a thing that increases in power the more expansions come out, the more Wizards of the Coast create weird, obscure, like, what would they be called? Universes Beyond, that's what it is. The more Wizards of the Coast does things like that, that adds more material that Volo can use. Like, I'm going to be getting a lot of the singles of the Warhammer 40k, just so I can add a Tyrannid to this deck, just so I can add an Astartes to this deck. Try to find a spot for a blue or green demon if there are any of them. Volo is going to love all these future universes beyond. that Wizard of the Coast is making, and ensure that Volo will have a very long life of powerful combos. Thanks for watching, guys. Like the video, comment, subscribe, all that good things, and I'll see you next time.